You guys may not remember, a very funny comment was made by Barbara Bush, um, George Herbert Walker Bush's wife, about 6 years ago when Jeb was running for president. You remember Jeb,
Yeah.
Yeah.
whom Donald Trump called low energy Jeb?
Low energy. Yeah.
Low energy chip.
Barbara said, if I can get this right, can't we have someone run for president besides a Bush or a Clinton?
Oh, wow.
And it was like, wow, Jeb had to defend that in public.
That's it.
That
That's
was
it. Yeah.
that was
That's
rough.
awesome.
And my mother said a few weeks ago, we were sitting together. She was I live in Virginia. She was visiting in Virginia. And we're sitting there and we're watching CNN, right? And she gets all frustrated. She's, she makes some nasty comment about Trump and Biden. And she says, can't we have someone run for president besides these two idiots? And I'm looking at her like, really, Ma? Really? Like, I'm doing my best, right?
That's awesome.
That is. That's good.
It's just,
Good
it
stuff.
seems like mothers are so close to it that they forget that, their sons
Yeah.
are working their asses off.
Oh, yeah.
Show a little appreciation here.
Right.
Well,
All right. Let's dive into this thing and let's get going. So, welcome to The Way It Should Be. I'm Dean.
I'm JD.
And today, joining us today is Mike Tremont, who is running for the presidential nomination for the Libertarian Party. Good to see you, Mike.
It's great to be with you guys today. Great to have seen you in Texas, of course, and great to be with you electronically today.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess jump in here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh boy, that's going to be the worst 3 minutes of your audience's day. I'll give the campaign's more interesting than I am personally, but I'll give you the 60-second background version. How's that?
That'll work.
Yeah, I grew up as a fiscally conservative, sort of a Republican type. I grew up in commercial banking, came out of business school and engineering school, went into banking in commercial finance. I went back to graduate school at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. I think I moved to Washington because I thought, what would be more logical if you were interested in making the world a better place, right? You move to
Right.
Washington, the seat of all power, and you teach the government how to do things right, and you change the tide of history, and everything is roses from there on out, right? Because that's how it works, right?
Yeah,
That's how it
exactly.
works.
It all works out exactly
And,
how you have it planned in your head.
Exactly. So anyway, I was in grad school, 90, 91, 92, studied economics. I got another second master's degree in my PhD in economics and went to work for a couple of international agencies. I worked for the White House as an economist for a couple years. I went back into the banking industry as an advocate for free markets and greater competition through the 90s in Washington still. I later on had my own business. I was in the business of providing some strategic consulting and a lot of educational programming for bankers and other financial services executives. And I taught economics at three different universities, mostly in Florida. And as a second career, I was an economist, I guess, for 25 years, depending on your definition of economist. As a second career, I went to work as a police officer, something that I had been interested in doing for a long, long time and just kept putting it off. And I worked as a police officer on patrol in Broward County. I worked for one of the cities there in South Florida for 11 and a half years, from the age of 49 to 60, until a couple of years ago. Moved from Florida to Virginia, and I now live, my wife Nancy and I live out in the middle of nowhere, eastern nowhere, Virginia.
That's awesome. So
That's the condensed version. As I get older, it takes longer to condense that down.
Yeah, well, it should, right?
Well, I
so
suppose.
yeah. So, what brought you into libertarianism? Like, how did you decide this is who I am? This is the path I'm going to pursue.
Uh, like a lot of others in the Libertarian Party, I started out in a different party. Like I say, I was a Republican for a while. At least I thought I was. I was fiscally conservative. I came to libertarianism initially from what I would call the right-hand side. I'm not sure that's a perfectly accurate characterization, but what I mean by that is the idea that's how our economy works better, right? When you
Yeah.
let financial, economic players, consumers, businesses, everybody else make decisions for themselves, that's the most efficient way to allow an economy to work. We have learned this the easy way and the hard way over the past 100 years, and I think that it's a pretty convincing case at this point. So I was coming at it from that side. In the 90s, a close friend of mine who actually works on he's one of the advisors to our campaign now, an attorney, who went to the University of Texas, by the way.
All
An
right.
attorney friend of mine, Russ, says to me, we were discussing social issues, and I had to tell him I thought the Republican Party should stay out of it. I wasn't terribly motivated by some of these, very conservative social positions the Republican Party wanted to take. And he said, "You're a libertarian." And I said something like, "I don't say mean things to you. Why would you say such a horrible thing to me, right?"
Being in
And
Texas,
what the hell is that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Being in
And,
Texas, we have that fight quite a bit on what a liberal what. So
Exactly. When I ran for Congress a couple years ago in Florida, I learned the hard way that most Americans don't know there's a Libertarian Party, don't know what libertarianism is. I would say most Americans probably couldn't accurately spell libertarianism.
I would agree with that.
And so when he said that to me, I had a rough idea of what libertarianism is, and I knew that the Libertarian Party existed. This is in the early 90s, the Harry Brown days, pre-Harry Brown days, actually. But I had little interest in exploring, at the time. I was merely pissed off at the Republican Party. And it wasn't until later that I came to libertarianism from what I would call the other side, maybe we should call it the left-hand side, which is to say, not merely a matter of what makes the economy work better, what makes our world work better, but as a matter of ethics. In other words, the way I explain this, see if you guys like this. Not everyone likes this explanation, so I want to try it out in you guys.
Okay.
Imagine a world in which socialism actually worked. That's a weird thing for a libertarian to say, but
Yeah.
imagine that the government actually could make decisions better for you than you could yourself. This is obviously a rough nightmare, but imagine a world in which the government could process all this information and it was actually run by geniuses with big computers, and they could make decisions for you better than you could yourself. The question is, in such a world, would the government have the ethical authority to make decisions for you? And I would argue that the answer is still no, that you have the right to live your life by your own standards according to your own ethics, free to make decisions that may not be perfect, right? But
Right.
part of being a human is learning from mistakes. God knows, and I mean that literally, God knows. The best way I have educated myself is by making mistakes that I'm not going to discuss with you guys, but I have made mistakes over the years, right? And so I would argue the government does not have the ethical, moral authority to make decisions for you, even if it could make decisions that were better for you. And so that's what I would argue is coming to libertarianism from the other side. I didn't join the Libertarian Party until 2010, maybe, around there, 2010, 2011, around the time I became a cop. I was a registered libertarian for the entire time that I was a police officer, which is also a bit odd, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel odd to me, but I'm told it sounds odd to some other people. And I've enjoyed being a registered libertarian for the most part, although I don't need to tell you guys that it can be frustrating. Am I right?
For sure.
For sure, yeah.
For sure, especially in a state like Texas, a red state. Yeah, that's a you're a, like I said earlier, you're a what? Or don't you dare
Yeah.
call me a liber anything, you know?
Yeah, I ain't no liberal. Although I imagine being a libertarian in California to be extra frustrating.
Probably so.
Yeah.
Because people would assume that you just mean you're some flavor of liberal.
Yeah, or just look at what California does and it makes you want to rip your hair out.
Oh, because
In
it's
general.
such a statist environment, because the
Yeah,
government
exactly.
is so progressive in terms of assuming power to itself. Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's frustrating just watching California. Can
It
you
is.
imagine living in it?
Oh,
It
no, I
is.
couldn't.
And we have a huge influx right now. I'm sure, like everybody, of Californians moving down here.
Yeah, it's too many.
Yeah, that's a whole topic for another time. But, but
And New
What,
Yorkers moving to Florida. We even have some Californians moving to Florida. I was in Florida until, like I say, almost 2 years ago. And we had a lot of folks moving to Florida. Florida's had tremendous in-migration from all over, but that has actually included California, not just New York.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you told us about some of your educational stuff. What would be, if you could get it out, or get it out to everybody? What would you tell people that would makes you qualified to run as the Libertarian, or to get the nomination for the Libertarian Party?
A couple of different things. One is that on the remember what the job is. What job we're interviewing for is to participate in the presidential election race, right? To do that successfully, and I believe it is an obligation for us to do that successfully this cycle. It's in 2024. We not only have a huge opportunity, I believe that we have an obligation as the Libertarian Party, because our government is quickly going off the rails. Some might even argue that we are past the point of no return and we cannot save anything of any value in the federal government. But let's set that aside just for the moment. I think
Yeah.
we can all agree that if you're waiting for a Republican or a Democrat to lead the charge back toward a constitutional democracy, we're waiting for something that I just don't believe is going to happen. So I think the Libertarian Party has not only a huge opportunity, but a big obligation in 2024. To take advantage of that opportunity and fulfill on that obligation, I think that we need to do a couple of things quite differently than we have in the past. The campaign that I am putting together is designed to fulfill on that. And by that I mean two different things. One is to run on a platform that is as principled as possible, that includes the most transformational libertarian ideas. We call it the Gold New Deal, of course, as you all have heard. Your folks can read about it to the extent to which they have an interest in the specifics in goldnewdeal.org. It is truly a platform designed to be a leading campaign in terms of libertarian principles, and importantly, to completely differentiate us from the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, which I believe is so important as a matter of strategy. I think that we need to present ourselves as a very starkly different choice than the duopoly that exists today. And I believe that that is a matter not only of correctly branding the Libertarian Party, but also to get as much attention as possible. It is a losing strategy to present our party as something similar to or having a great deal of overlap with the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. So that's number one. Number two is something that we also, in my view, haven't done particularly well in past campaigns, and that is to run a very, very professional, a very, very credible campaign, and if I might be allowed to say so, to run with a candidate who is qualified to actually compete in the race. And the reason I believe that that is so important is that the American public expects a certain threshold to be met before they would assign any credibility to the notion that you can truly compete in the race for the presidency. Inside of our party, of course, we have not traditionally assigned a lot of importance to background and qualifications of our candidate. I would put myself in that category. I typically don't get all that torqued up about the extent to which our candidates for either president or anything else have a tremendous amount of public policy background in public service. That sort of thing just, hasn't been all that important to us traditionally. However, outside of our party,
Yep.
it matters oodles, right? It matters to individual voters, but it also matters a tremendous amount to the media. And we saw that with Gary Johnson's campaign. The media was willing to give him a little bit more time. They're willing to listen a little bit more, assign him a little bit more credibility. I believe that's the reason why he did so much better in the polls and at the end in terms of voting. Not because he was running on such a terrific platform. He wasn't.
No, he was not.
He was not. The reason he did a little better than some of our other candidates is because a lot of folks were willing to look at his background and say, well, I could at least imagine this guy, as goofy as he may present, I could at least imagine this guy going all the way. If you're not going to run a campaign that's in it to win it, if you're not running a candidate who can actually compete, then you're not taking advantage of the value that there is in participating in the race in 2024. You could run a national ad campaign in 2025 or 2026 or 2023 or 2022, right? The
Yeah.
difference in 2024 is that there's a race. And people pay attention because they want to see who the next president of the United States is going to be. That's why they pay attention. And if you're not actually competing in that race, if they don't think that you're going to be competitive, I agree. Why should they pay any attention, right? So you need to meet that threshold, and I believe that our campaign does that. So I think that we check very, very important boxes, two different boxes.
Okay, so here's one question I got. So let's say you get the nomination to be the presidential candidate. Not only is your job trying to win, right, which is a tall order for libertarians, but also I would feel like it's also the candidate's job to try and help grow the party. So do you have any plans for growing the party at, say, the local level, the state levels?
Yeah, there's two important things. One is you got to be on the road a lot. There's no question about that. You have to be on the road a lot. But the other thing that is of uber importance, and anyone who's run for local office knows this, when you run for local office, you spend half your time explaining to people what libertarianism is,
Yes.
that there is a party. And I lay that at the feet of our past campaigns that have not done a very good job of branding us. We have to run a campaign that clearly identifies what libertarianism is and clearly draws a big distinction between our party and the other parties. That's what's most important. That is why the national campaign is so important. We have to work hand in glove. No, a national campaign, a presidential candidate, cannot do the groundwork that 1,000 local candidates can do. Right? But that's not the job. The job is to take advantage of the presidential race and the interest in it for media attention and the money that you can raise to run advertising that must boldly, in a principled fashion, differentiate you from the duopoly.
Yeah.
Once people understand what libertarianism is, local candidates are going to be able to run much better, not only because people will know what they're talking about, but because you won't have to waste time explaining it, right? So it's, in my view, this is the most important aspect of a presidential campaign, is to brand the party so that down ballot candidates can do better. It'll also help us recruit more candidates. And if we can do better, particularly in statewide races, it'll boost our ballot access for future races. This is the way I think that it has to work. But for that to work successfully, you have to play to win.
Yeah.
And we are.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, your job as the presidential candidate would be to be the brand ambassador for the Libertarian Party and get more people to be able to explain what it is effectively, because a lot of people just don't know what it is. And you also got to be able
You're
to make
exactly right. And to do that successfully means differentiation. Our job
Yeah.
is not to look for overlap
yes,
with
which is what we
common
typically have
ground
done.
with the Democratic politicians, the Republican politicians. It's to find common ground with their voters,
Right.
but not with their politicians.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. We're playing it to win, and then also knowing what the job is, as far as, like you said, the brand ambassador. Because
Yeah.
because you're right. You said it. If people don't feel like you're playing to win, why?
Yeah, why should I
do
vote
I
for that
pay
guy?
attention to you? So I really like that. Come saying that. We're in
It's
it to
the
win it.
unfortunate truth. I would love it if we lived in a world in which we could get lots of attention without playing to win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's just
Yeah.
not the world we live in. You've got to play to win and convince people that you're a credible threat to disrupt the duopoly to get any attention. And that's why we're going to play it that way. And by the way, parenthetically, I believe that we will disrupt the duopoly. I believe that we will be successful in this sense. Remember that the numbers that we're talking about are not as large as some people would suggest. In other words, we're not shooting for 60% of the American public. We're not looking for 50% of the vote. In a three-way race, think about this. In a three-way race, which is harder to say than I thought it would be, 37% wins. Think about that. 37% wins. In a four-way race, less than that, right? Probably 32% would win in a really robust four-way race, assuming RFK Jr. pulls any votes away from the Democratic Party, which
Which he probably
will, right? So for us to play an important role in screwing this up for the Republicans and for the Democrats does not mean that we need to successfully reach out and convince, 75% of Americans. It means that we need to reach and convince a third of Americans.
Yeah.
And while I believe it is true that the vast majority of Americans have a libertarian streak, that they wouldn't characterize it as such, right? But they do. I also believe that half that many, say a third, have a strong libertarian streak, are pissed off about the government, want real change, are ready for a message of institutional level explosion,
Yeah.
and will support a campaign like ours. And it only takes a third to completely upend that apple cart.
Yeah. So on that note, what are some of the policies you're going to take to the voters and to make your case for why you should be president? So let's start with like the economic policy. What we're looking at $33.5 trillion right now. We're running a $2 trillion deficit.
By the time you and I hang up this podcast, it's going to be 34 trillion.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, which is the big problem with what's going on with inflation right now. I remember when they started handing out all those checks. I remember telling some family members, I said, "You just wait, because we're going to feel the effects of this a year from now or 2 years from now. It's going to hit us hard." And when you look at the
Yeah, you
price
got
of
that
groceries in the
right.
store, yeah. And nobody
You
believed
totally
me at the
got
time,
that
but
right,
they
as well as the amount of money that the Fed was creating for the several years prior to that to try
Yes.
to buy our way out of the recession of
Yep.
2008, 2007, 2008, 2009, which itself was caused by bad public policy. And of course, the recession around the COVID time was because of bad COVID-related, ostensibly COVID-related, bad government policy. So all of this is related. I think there's a couple of messages that Americans are ready to hear. One is that our financial problems are not just a weird gift from heaven. These are the results of bad public policy.
yeah.
I think people are ready to hear that. And I think that people are ready to hear that the problem with our debt is yes, our children and grandchildren have to pay that back. There is no such thing as a free lunch. It's a tremendous burden, a tremendous amount of money, and it is an ethical problem. It's not just, this is not an argument that we're going to win with a calculator.
Yeah.
We need to convince people that it's okay for them to think with their hearts, because it is. This is an ethical problem. Telling a future generation that you're going to have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars per head because we spent away your future, that is absolutely in moral contrast with where the American people are in their hearts. And we have to remind them that it's okay to feel that. That's number one. Number two, I really liked the way that you correctly identified that spending is the reason that we have so much inflation. Spending is the root of all evil. Spending is what leads to taxes that are too high, inflation that is too high, and debt that is too high. Milton Friedman taught us this decades ago, that however you finance the amount of spending, all government spending is a cost and a burden on the American people, and we need to get that under control. I would certainly be open to a constitutional amendment to limit the extent to which the government can spend money. When I worked for the White House in 89, 90, 91, 92, something like that, my job was to help enforce what we had in those days called budget control law. We don't have that anymore. It obviously wasn't perfect.
We don't have a budget anymore.
We don't, for all practical purposes, we don't have a budget anymore because they change it every year and just spend as much money as they want. So we need to beat that drum hard, that it is all about too much spending. And we can all argue about which aspect of spending is too much. I believe that entitlements have to be reformed. Our Defense Department spends way too much money.
Yep.
The bar that we have set for our defense budget is insane. The idea that the objective ought to be the ability to fight 2 world wars at the same time and win them both against the rest of humanity, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That is a weird objective.
Yep.
That is a weird bar to set. That's too much money. And of course, we spend too much money on everything else as well. But I believe that politically speaking, it's very difficult to convince people to give up money in this particular place or that particular place. Instead, you've got to go after it as an umbrella, with the idea being you can't go above the umbrella threshold. Everything has to come down proportionally. We do need entitlement reform. And again, I don't think this is an argument that we're going to win with a calculator. This has to be a values-based, bedrock values type of discussion. Social Security stinks. Social Security is, a financial disaster. But the real way that I think that it needs to be won is not arguing about, well, should the retirement age be, 68 or 68 and a half? That is not a compelling argument. The argument that we need to be making is that recruiting young people into a pyramid scheme in order to support the huge overhang of elderly retirees, that is unethical.
Sure.
That is evil. Recruiting youngsters into a program that's virtually guaranteed to give them a crappy rate of return in contrast to what they could be doing elsewhere with their money, that is a completely unethical system, and we've got to stop it. I just believe that we need to be able to remind Americans that they should be no longer wasting their vote. They should be spending their vote on a campaign, on a party, on a candidate that aligns with their values. And it is indeed our campaign that aligns with Americans' values. Stop wasting your vote and vote for your values.
Yeah. So what would you tell those those people that are sitting on Social Security right now, I get
We're
what
going
you're
to give
saying.
you an exit ramp, or if you're past a certain age, the option will remain for you to remain in the system. We're not so unethical that we're going to say, thanks for your coin,
Yeah.
get out of the system, grandma, get a job. That's not what I'm talking about. You can't take money from people for 40 years, then say, well, thanks
Tough.
for the donation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's no more ethical. But if you're in the system already and you're not retired yet, I would be open to the idea of offering people a buyout option, maybe a couple of different options. You can get out completely, you can get out by half, you can stay in. I wouldn't advise it. But as far as recruiting new people into the system, we got to cut that out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And politically speaking, it may well be that the first step to that is giving youngsters an option not to get in. But where we're eventually headed is no longer recruiting anybody into the system and eventually sunsetting the system lock, stock, and barrel. It is not an ethical system, and it needs to end completely, in my view.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
So I had a question for you on the debate there. What was it called? Pumpkins and Peace? Is that what it was? I guess, or the New Jersey
Pieces
debate?
of
I think
pumpkin, it was something like that.
Yeah,
in
something-
northern New Jersey.
Northern New Jersey. I think you said you were you and correct me if I'm wrong, but doing away with the Department of Education.
Yeah.
How would you go about it? Is that something? Am I correct saying that that's what you're for? And how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. The Department of Education has got a couple of different problems. One is that it's in my view, in contrast to the Constitution. But having said that, we're all disappointed with the Constitution not having the teeth to back itself up. So people have, over the last couple of 100 years, interpreted the Constitution to mean whatever they want it to mean. So saying that something is not constitutional doesn't carry a lot of water these days, unfortunately. But having said that, the Department of Education has proven itself to be a disaster both in ethical terms and empirical terms. And by ethical terms, I mean, I don't think you can characterize something as being completely moral when you're taking money from people all over the United States and then giving it back to them with strings attached, right? It just as a general proposition, never mind the category of education. Just as a general matter, if I take $100 from you and then I say, you can have it back, but you gotta, kiss my ass.
Yeah.
At some point you gotta say, that's a little weird. I'm not an idiot. I could have spent that $100 the way, my brain and my heart tell me would have been the best way to spend it. Why am I better off because you took my money and then you're giving it back to me with strings that, I got to do certain things. I got to jump through certain hoops. I have to change my education system. I got to make promises to the federal government. That's weird. Even if you agreed that the Department of Education had its heart and mind in the right place and these people were smarter than everybody else, none of which is true, by the way. But even if you believed that were true, it would still be weird that you would decide to defer to the federal government. I mean, after all, they could have just sent me a memo, right? We're not going to take your money, but by the way, this is how you should be running your school board.
Yep.
Okay, thanks for the advice. But that's not how it works. How it works is the federal government takes your money and then block grants it back to the states as long as the states agree to do certain things. And I think that that's ethically a problem. Now, empirically speaking, it also turns out to be true that they're full of shit. They just don't know what they're doing when it comes to education. And they have proven it. And I don't mean to sound nasty, right? I mean, we're talking about a lot of very smart, hardworking, well-intentioned, patriotic Americans who are trying to do the right thing. I'll give you that, right? I'll give you that. Even though I think the system is unethical, I don't mean the individuals are trying to screw up our world. I think that they actually think that they're, doing a good job. But the truth is that they're not. It helps continue and advance a public school system that should be opening itself up to competition. And by locking in ever increasing amounts of money into the public school sector, you're marginalizing, increasingly so, you're marginalizing the ability of the private sector to compete. I believe in the fullness of time, and I don't know whether that's, 10 years or 110 years, but in the fullness of time, the vast majority of education, quite possibly all primary and secondary education, will be in the private sector.
That's the
as
dream,
I
isn't
believe
it?
that it should be.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah,
well-
it's crazy to think that you could have, that you're going to put the same things in schools as big as this country is, that the same things work for these schools. It's just it's those people could be thinking they're doing a good job, but they're destined for failure with the way everything is, with the way the country is and everything is large. So, yeah, I'm all
I agree.
for that.
I agree wholeheartedly. And, and you wouldn't put up with this in any other industry.
No,
Yeah.
you would not.
There is no other industry in America where, we have a monopoly and we say that's a good thing, that works better. We don't need competition. Indeed, the other business with which we're so frustrated that I spend a lot of time talking about is our need for police reform, right? And it has exactly the same problems, where if you're frustrated with your police department, it's very difficult to dump your police department and replace it, right?
Yeah.
Just like your local school, it's really hard to open up that sucker to competition. In the town that I worked for example, we only had two choices. The police department that I worked for, or the city could fire all of us, as it reminded us once in a while, and hire the sheriff's office. So at least they had two choices, and two is not a lot of choices, right?
Right.
Coke and Pepsi, and that's it.
Yeah.
And plenty of places in the United States don't even have two choices. They're stuck with the sheriff's office, for example. And that's just bad public policy. You wouldn't put up with that with your garbage service. You wouldn't have state law say, all garbage pickup has to be in the public sector. That's, you would say that's stupid, and it is stupid.
So let me ask you then. Okay, on that police reform deal, you only got, like you said, you only have two choices for the most parts. What are your plans for the police reform? Are you talking like private police departments that are licensed by the state or something to do the job, or what?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
I don't know that you need to be licensed by the state, but
I agree,
yeah,
but I
under
was just
current
throwing something
laws,
out.
you got to be licensed by the state. Indeed,
Yeah.
under current law, individual officers have to be certified by the state. It seems to me that a private sector consortium ought to be able to certify officers as well as the government can, but that's a relatively minor point compared to the bigger point that state laws need to be rewritten to allow an organization, a private sector organization, to compete for the contract of providing police services to a community, just like a garbage company can bid on a contract to provide, garbage pickup services in your town. And in this way, you can hold an agency more accountable. Some agencies can be reformed. Some agencies can be better reformed if you hold their feet to the fire and threaten them with firing them completely. And some agencies just stink. I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not saying anything that anyone doesn't already know. There are companies in every industry that stink, and sometimes you just have to fire them and replace them altogether. I also believe that we need to do a better job of holding officers accountable at the individual officer level, just like teachers, right? We want these two industries to look more like the rest of America, where the good ones get paid more and the mediocre get paid less and the crappy ones get fired. That's the way other businesses work. It's the way that these businesses ought to work as well, and the unions have really stood in the way of that, and in a way that they don't appreciate, holds back competition for their own members to the financial detriment in the long run of their members. They don't have any conception of that. But I believe, just like a lot of the rest of America has become deunionized, these two businesses will become deunionized increasingly over the next couple of decades as well, and we'll get better reform going. By the way, one of the things that you can do to accelerate that process is replacing qualified immunity, the federal judicial doctrine, with state law that says individual officers have to carry their own liability insurance.
Yeah.
And in this way, you would bring in an insurance company from the outside as a private sector third party check on the system. Because we all know that an insurance company is not going to put up with the crap that unions throw up in the face of politicians saying, you know, you can't fire this person. An insurance company will just price you out of the market if you're bad at your job, and that's the way that we want it to work.
Yeah, that'd be great because you get a cop that's constantly being reported, and insurance companies are constantly paying out for this guy. They're just going to drop him.
Yeah.
And if you don't have insurance, then you can't work. So
that's the way it works in the medical profession. That's the way it ought to work.
Yeah, that's a
you know,
great.
we don't tell people who are patients of poorly performing doctors, well, he cut off the wrong foot, but he didn't mean to, right? So suck it up, Buttercup. That's not how this goes, right?
Yeah.
We don't need to be passing out immunity. We need to be allowing the courts to work the way that they should work. And I appreciate cops' concerns that there will be some frivolous lawsuits. There'll be some crappy lawsuits. I get that. Mm-hmm. Welcome to the real world. Yeah. You know, in the real world, there are frivolous lawsuits and the courts are jammed. I get that. We do need court reform also. But we do need courts to do their job because that is a piece of the puzzle in terms of holding people accountable, including cops.
Yeah. Got anything?
I do. So, since on the law or on the law enforcement, where do you stand? It's probably a dumb question. You're running for libertarian, but where do you stand? How would you do with weed legalization? How would you go about doing that federally?
Well, we got to legalize. We have to finish legalizing marijuana. We haven't finished. We've made some progress. We have decriminalized in a lot of places de facto, even when it wasn't decriminalized de jure. A lot of cops, my police department that I worked for until a couple of years ago, is in this category where we just weren't enforcing very stringently anyway marijuana criminalization. I was not a narcotics cop, so I didn't personally have to be, involved in this. But our police department was, let's just say, I don't want to get anyone in trouble here. Our department did not have much interest in going after people for marijuana. But I believe more importantly, the next step is to decriminalize at the federal level and pressure states to decriminalize other non-addictive drugs. And I believe that once Americans get used to marijuana being decriminalized, they will quickly, I believe we can start now, I believe most Americans will quickly get used to non-addictive drugs being decriminalized, and I believe that the next step will be decriminalizing all drugs. Yeah. And Americans will see in a stepwise fashion that there isn't that much to fear by decriminalization. And indeed, this is the best way to treat what is, at its heart, a medical problem. This shouldn't be treated as a crime problem. You're not committing a crime in any real sense by doing what it is you want to do with your body. I am personally not a fan of drugs, but that should have nothing to do with it, right? That's the difference between libertarianism and a Republican. A Republican will make rules for you because he believes that he knows what's best for your body. And a libertarian says, maybe I don't agree with you, but that doesn't matter. You do you.
Yeah. So I'm kind of jump around with another one. I agree with everything you said, but I think you said something when we ran across you at Waco about possibly doing a debate with RFK. Am I Did I hear that right?
We're
Did I
pushing for it. We don't have any traction yet.
pushing for it? Yeah. So what about the Green Party candidate as well?
Well,
I mean,
and to be fair, if you were RFK, you probably wouldn't want to debate me right now either. You would want to wait until, well, I shouldn't try to make strategy for him. I get why up until.
yeah,
I
we
get
actually
why
spoke.
up until now he has said no. I think that his interests are about to change. But it's a matter of timing. Everyone's got to feel their way through the process.
It'd be fantastic if they do it. It'd be good for everybody, I think, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I mean the Green Party as well. I don't even know if the Green Party. Well, I guess it's Cornell. Is it Cornell West? Is he running?
Is he running
I
again
think he's
for them?
running for the Green Party.
He
For the
is
Green
running.
Party,
They need to figure out. I think he's going to run as an independent.
Oh, okay.
Really?
I don't think that Cornell is all that green. I don't know the extent to which the Green Party is committed to being as green as they used to be. They got ballot access problems, of course.
Yeah.
These people are. They're pretty far behind us as the Libertarian Party. They're pretty far behind us in terms of ballot access. So, to a certain extent at the moment, it might be punching down for us.
Yeah. So, man, I wrote this down. I can't even read my own handwriting. One of the big issues right now is the border, the southern border. What is President Mike Tremont going to do about that?
We're going to do a couple of different things. One is that we're going to start right off communicating, and we're going to communicate this to people throughout the campaign, that immigration is good for America. That we need a more pro-immigrant policy and a more pro-immigration policy. And I believe that those are two different things. We need to treat immigrants with a tremendous amount of dignity compared to the way we have done it up until now. The idea of allowing people to come in illegally and getting involved in indentured servitude is creating a humanitarian crisis of epic proportion. It is terrible. It is disgusting. It is the one thing that was impressed upon me most when I spent a couple of days down at the border in Arizona earlier this year. It's a really hellacious situation. In the interest of immigrants themselves, we need to close the border to illegal immigration. We also need to take away the incentive to come in illegally by improving the means by which people come in legally. I am not a fan, I know you guys aren't either, fans of using federal resources to do anything. But if there is one thing that I think that the federal government should get better at, is vetting people through on the border. I often remind folks, when I worked for the White House, we could vet someone in 90 minutes.
Wow.
I know that this is apples and oranges, but my point is, don't tell me it takes weeks and months and years, and in some case decades, to make up your mind whether somebody coming across the Mexican border is worthy of being in the United States. If you can't figure that out in a day, you're trying to figure out something you shouldn't be trying to figure out. And I recognize that Americans are not ready for an open border, right? Americans expect, and I get this. Americans expect there to be some vetting going on at the border. Okay, given that, we need to get better at it, faster at it, and when we bring people in, by the way, we need to stop telling them that they can't work. In my view, that's stupid. I would be more comfortable with a policy that says, you have to work.
Yeah.
I'd be more comfortable calling someone on the phone in 6 weeks and saying, did you get a job?
Yeah.
Find work. We are not in the business. We should not be in the business of encouraging people to come in who are lazy. That's not why people come to the United States in the first place. People come here to work. That's why they're coming. Why would you tell them that they can't work? I think that that's dumb, and it's financially and economically a problem for our country and runs counter to our interests.
Yeah, there was the only thing that the George W. Bush administration ever tried to do. Well, he did two things. He tried to privatize Social Security, but Republicans wouldn't have anything to do with it. And then surprisingly, he tried to come up with a guest worker program. I don't know if you remember this or not.
I do remember it.
That was immediately killed by the Republican Party.
Absolutely. He had problems with the Republican Party. The Republicans have not been as interested in deep reform as we all would have wished. And I remember those days well. The Social Security reform was being championed by the Cato Institute. In those
And
days,
Heritage,
we
I
used to
believe.
think of the Cato Institute as being worth a damn. Now they spend as much time frustrating us as they do leading the charge with good analytic work, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I remember W running for governor of Texas in 98 for the second term. I was down in Austin campaigning for him. I was still a Republican at the time and learned the hard way that the Republican Party was not interested in the deep reforms that you guys and I are interested in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a real I mean, good for him for pushing. Good for him.
Yes.
You know, you got to
Yeah.
give credit where credit is due, but he was not able to get it done because I think the Republican Party just doesn't have an interest in reform.
Yeah, that guest worker program would have solved a lot of the problems we're dealing with right now, because you would have. I don't know if you know anything about it, but basically, they show up at a border crossing, say I'm here to work. They fingerprint them, photograph them. Here's your ID. You can take your work visa to any job. You didn't have to have one already, and it was good for 2 years. And then at the end of the 2 years, you could renew it or you go back home. And I think after a while, it would give you the chance to apply for permanent residency. The longer you were here,
Yeah, it would
but I can't remember.
accelerate that process, and I think that's real important. This idea of you got to come back for a hearing in a few years, and then nobody shows up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be
it's
so much
designed
better.
for failure.
Yeah, it'd be better if he said, "Here's your card. Go get a job, and when it's time to renew it, come back and we'll hook you up. You don't have to worry about applying for asylum or all that other crap.
It
We
would
already
be
know who you are,
better
where you're
if
at."
we vetted people through. We said, go get a job, and we didn't follow up with them. Work
Yeah.
your ass off, become, part of the American establishment and citizenry and culture and society. You do you. We welcome your entrepreneurial spirit and the spirit with which most people come to the United States.
Yeah. What about birthright citizenship? How do you feel about that? Do you want to keep that? Get rid of it?
I'm okay with it
Okay.
because I'm okay with immigration generally.
All right. Well, that answers
Well,
that.
and consider the alternative. The big reason I'm okay with birthright citizenship is because I'm not okay with the alternative. Mm-hmm. The alternative is some kid turns 16 and applies for a driver's license and a social security card, and now what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get
That's
that.
the problem. That's the problem.
So kind of along those same lines, well, just more so Texas, but what's your thoughts or on the Texit? Now, a lot of our listeners, a majority of our listeners are Texans. We're Texans. The Texit or the Texas secession movements. Where do you stand on that?
I got a couple of different things to say about that. First of all, before I call you people all crazy, let me say to everybody out there who thinks you're crazy, right? And I get it. There are a number of your listeners who think that Texas seceding or anybody else seceding is insane. I get that. I'm speaking to those people right now who think that, the idea is crazy and insane and unworkable and would cause a nightmare and is stupid. I'm talking to all you people. You know who you are. You can hear my voice. You may be right that this is a crazy idea, but don't tell me you haven't thought about it. Because if you tell me you haven't thought about it, you're a lying SOB. That's the truth. Everybody thinks about it because we all get frustrated with the federal government. We're all frustrated with the state government too, by the way. And sometimes we're frustrated with our cities and our counties. But we are uber frustrated with the federal government. You have thought about it. So don't tell me anyone who's ever thought about it is a schmuck, because that includes each and every one of us. I have spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about it. Indeed, in Florida, soon after I moved to Virginia, I was back at the Florida convention visiting friends. And at the Florida convention, they voted to secede.
Really?
Now, hear my words carefully. I am not saying they voted we ought to have the right to secede. We ought to study secession. We ought to consider it. We need a cost benefit. No. They voted to secede. We have the right. We've done the thinking. We've done the cost benefit analysis. We're done thinking. We want to secede. And when that vote was over, they gave themselves a standing ovation. And I want to say, I get it. We have all been frustrated by the federal government. If it hasn't crossed your mind, then you're not thinking, because it's got to cross your mind. Now, having said that, on balance, I think that there's a better solution than secession. Give me a chance to make my case for my other solution, okay? Before you string me up. Because I could be wrong. You know, we could have this conversation 20 years from now, and you could say, well, Mike, we tried your way. It didn't work. Now we're going to secede. And I would have to say, yeah, that's probably true. Okay? But give me a chance to make my case for plan A. Plan A, and by the way, let me explain why I think plan B of secession is not perfect. For one thing, each state is itself an amalgam of different thinking people. With few exceptions, California is overwhelmingly blue.
Yeah.
Texas is fairly red, but I don't know if you guys are as red as you might think you are.
I think we're more purple than anything.
Yeah,
right
we're
now.
more purple. Yeah.
Thanks, California.
Anyone who has made the drive from Dallas to Austin as many times as I have, and let me parenthetically say anyone who made the drive between Chicago and Springfield, I grew up in Illinois, as many times as I have, anyone who has driven around from New York City to Buffalo and everything in between, as I have, anyone who's ever driven from Miami to Ocala knows all of the states are an amalgam, are mixed up, right? And
Yeah.
you're right, purple, but it's not just purple, it's blue and red.
It's rural and urban.
Yes.
It's rural and urban. It's right and left. It's progressive and conservative. It's statist and libertarian. It's mixed up. And I think a lot of people would have to admit that the perfect secession that they would love to have is for the dotted line to be driven around their house. Like, I want my neighbors in a different
Yeah.
state, right? I want my crazy brother-in-law in a different state. It's hard to say my state all thinks the way that I do, right? That's a lift. That's an uphill climb. And so that concerns me. But anyway, let me explain Plan A. This is the flagship of the Gold New Deal. The Gold New Deal is our platform representing a new relationship between us and the federal government, and between states and the federal government. The flagship of the Gold New Deal is the idea that states ought to have a right to opt out of federal supremacy, a right to opt into unilateral nullification. In other words, states ought to have the right to resolve conflicts between state law and federal law in state court.
So basically just applying the 10th Amendment.
Yes, as a matter of fact, any number of friends of mine have made fun of me for this idea, saying, well, we could just pass the 10th Amendment over again and say, this time we mean it.
Yeah, yeah. That was always a big. I was always confused by why they made that amendment, but there was no process for actually enforcing it. Put it within the
And
the
a lot
amendment.
of the from your lips to God's ears. And for the rest of the Constitution, there's not a lot of, and what happens if you don't? I mean, pick one. The First Amendment. The government is not supposed to be censoring us, but it does. The Constitution doesn't say what to do about it. You can set your hair on fire, but short of that, you've got to rely on the courts, and courts have given far too much deference to the federal government, especially federal courts, right? And so I believe that we need to give states the right to resolve these issues in their own state courts. And that's not a silver bullet. I don't mean that it is. That's not going to solve all the world's problems. But I do think that giving states the ability to opt out of federal supremacy would give them the ability to chart their own political future. It would give them, and think about the implications, it would give them an ability to disregard federal regulation.
Yeah.
This is a way to effectively sunset federal agencies. You wouldn't have to put up with the Department of Education. Think about that.
Yeah.
The Department of Transportation. So it means a lot. It's a big deal. And in this sense, I believe that you could, in some ways, feel as though you have seceded for everything but national defense.
Yeah.
And by the way, all of this is in the context of the one thing I wish the federal government could do more of, could do better, about which it should be more muscular, is in protecting our individual liberties. We would all be more tolerant of a federal government if the federal government were to say to us, the job of the federal government is to protect your rights under the federal Constitution, your rights in the face of states encroaching.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's not what the federal government does, right?
Yeah.
But imagine a world in which, the state of Florida says school boards have to do this or that, which is, a big argument the last few years, right? Governor DeSantis has effectively said to Donald Trump and Joe Biden, you don't have the right to violate the Constitution. I get to violate the Constitution.
Yeah.
And, imagine a world in which the Justice Department, perhaps led by a libertarian-minded Department of Education, this is obviously a fantasy world, but work with me here, I'm dreaming. Wouldn't it be cool if the federal government were to come in and say, no, a governor doesn't have the right to dictate to people how they educate their children, that has to be decided at the local level. But anyway, that is not what the federal government has taken upon itself to do. And for this reason, I believe that states need an option to get out from under federal supremacy.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Could not agree more.
And if that works, we won't need to secede.
Yeah.
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 That's my argument.
I'm not 100% for secession, but if they put it up for a vote, I'd vote for it. But
No, I get it.
I think
But
the United.
give me a chance to run Plan A first.
I'm just saying, as a proud Texan, I don't have a choice but to vote for it. But I do think we're all better off united as a single country, economically, militarily, and in just every way possible. If we just apply the principles of federalism to the federal government and let the states each decide their own way of going about things, with the federal government just making sure we're not going to war with each other, we'd be much better off in this country.
In other words, pass the 10th Amendment over again and say, this time we mean it.
Pretty much, yeah. Yep.
Well, I have just a couple little quick ones here, quick ones to ask you. So, if you could, what do you think? What sets you apart from the other candidates that are running right now? Is there anything just a quick that would set you apart?
I think the nature of our campaign, a little bit my own personal background. We're running a very, very professional campaign. We got 15 people on the team that we pay a little bit of money each. Some people we pay quite a bit. We got another dozen advisors who are volunteer advisors. We've got another bunch of volunteers on top of that. So we have a very big, very professional team. Anyone who's seen our messaging knows that we run with a lot of credibility. We back up everything we say. And I believe that that's particularly important in this cycle because we're running such a transformational platform. The Golden New Deal is really edgy. It's really out there. And for this reason, you got to be able to back it up. It's one thing to say, we're fiscally conservative. Any doofus could say that, right?
Yeah.
But if you're going to say we need to take down the Fed, we need to change the way monetary policy is run, we're going to cap federal spending, we're going to end the ability of the White House to declare war unilaterally, we're going to run a non-military interventionist policy. If you're going to talk about real fundamental transformation, you got to be able to back that up. And I believe that having not one but two careers in public policy, long history in public service, I meet the threshold that Americans expect from a candidate. It gives me the credibility to back up our very, very important, very principled platform. And I think that that's something our campaign does in a way that other campaigns won't be able to do.
Yeah, I agree. So one other deal, just kind of final one here for me anyway, is someone comes to you and they say, hey, what's this libertarian stuff? I think, and they kind of express it. What resource, what books, where do you send them to learn more about being a libertarian or what a libertarian is?
That's a great question. I've had different answers from time to time. Let me give you two answers that have worked for me over time. And everyone's different, right? And by the way, one is our website. You go to MikeTremont.com or goldnewdeal.org. Probably easier to go to goldnewdeal.org and then link over to MikeTremont.com because not everyone can spell Tremont. It's got two A's. You're going to read some stuff there that I think that most people are going to find really interesting. To us as libertarians, it comes across as a little bit bread and butter. No one's going to, get a hernia about reading our website. I think it's going to be exciting for libertarians. But if you're not a libertarian, you're going to look at that and you're going to get your hair blown back. It's pretty transformational stuff. We talk about ending the Fed. And on the campaign website, you're going to find a lot of videos that back that up, and a lot of depth and a lot of thought that's gone into it from our team. So I think that that's a real educational resource that some people are going to enjoy very much. But the other thing, and shame on me for not talking about this more, one of the things that drove me to libertarian thought, at least as I characterize it from the right-hand side, from the efficiency side, was Milton Friedman. I grew up a Milton Friedman guy, Chicago school economist, before I learned even more about its ancestor and predecessor, the Austrian school. Milton and Rose Friedman used to write and do videos in a way that was very, very accessible to people. I would encourage people to read an old book. The first book I read about economics was called Free to Choose, which was written by Milton and Rose several thousand years ago. My dad made me read it when I was 18 or something. It must have been like 1980, 1979, 80, 81, somewhere in there. A really easy read, right? A lot of us as libertarians have read Hazlitt, Economics in One Easy Lesson, or in one single lesson, something like. I just butchered the title. I apologize. And that's a good read because Hazlitt was a journalist, not an economist, and so in that sense, it was very accessible. The other thing is there's a lot of Milton Friedman videos online, and if you're lucky, you'll find some videos with Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell. Big nice. Thomas Sowell fan. I do characterize Thomas Sowell as our most important living economist. And the fact that he is still active is, in my view, quite literally a blessing from God. He is a very interesting guy and a Marine and a New Yorker and a great economist. The other thing, I said some nasty things about Cato earlier, so let me throw Cato a bone because they have David Boaz, who has done a lot of things I don't like, but he's got a book called The Libertarian Reader, which I found very interesting years ago when I first looked at it, because it's got a few pages from John Locke and a few pages from Mises and a few pages from Hayek, and you get where I'm going.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a fun, easy read. And the Mises Institute website, I don't know if you guys have ever looked at the Mises Institute
Oh,
website.
for sure.
Yeah.
Holy cow!
It's got everything you need
Holy
right there.
cow! Is that thing stacked or what?
Yep.
There is material on there. I mean, you could fall into that website and nobody would find you for 3 years.
Yeah.
There is a lot of stuff there.
And all their books are free.
Yeah. Some of it very thick, not easy. Some of it very accessible for absolutely anybody. So, sorry, that may be more answer than you wanted.
No,
but
that's
those
fine.
are some of my favorites.
That's great. Well, you got any?
No, I don't have anything else.
Yeah.
You got any social media websites you want to plug before we let you go?
No, it's a complete secret. I don't want anyone to learn about our campaign. Look, I do think the websites are the best place to go. Yeah, you can tweet at us if you want at Termont Mike instead of Mike Termont. I'm not sure why that's backwards. That's kind of weird. There are a bunch of other Mike Termonts in the United States, by the way, which I find weird. But anyway,
Yeah, I don't.
you can
guess I've
find
never
us
heard
on Twitter. We do some tweeting. We don't spend a great deal of energy on social media right now, but we spend some. We got some statements on there about the Israeli conflict with the Palestinians, for example. And you can find a lot of material at MikeTremont.com. And arguably most important, go to goldnewdeal.org.
All right.
goldnewdeal.org.
Awesome.
Well, hopefully
Thank you,
we can.
guys. You guys are a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Well, thanks for coming on, and hopefully we can have you on down the road again. So,
I would like that. I look forward to it.
all right.
All right.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you,
one.
Mike. Appreciate it.
Next time, guys.
You take care.